Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another of our webinar Wednesdays. It's great to have you joining us today. I am Kelly Bearden and it's great to be here. So I have a great webinar planned today and a lot of good things happening. We've got some great economists coming in. Got a few things working out around here, but plenty to go through. So this is Managing Your Small Business Beyond the Pandemic. This is number 97 in our series of webinars since going back to the pandemic on March 18th. Every Wednesday we've been here live, and to try to bring you an update on the newest, the latest, the greatest, and even some of the stuff that's not so good. So that's what we have for you, and kind of move along. So what's up today? It is January the 19th, and we do have a pair of great economics professors joining us today to talk about the very latest going on, not only in our economy on a global side of things, on a regional, but also the local stuff that's going on and happening. So looking forward to that, having a good economics forecast. You always got to have a good forecast or review or something this time of year. We will take a glance at the pandemic relief programs that are still open. We'll look at what's coming and, basically what's coming down the road as far as some of the pandemic relief. We still are having that battle, with Omicron, that Omicron varmint, as I like to call it, that seems to be going as well as can be expected. We're out and about, we're going, we're keeping our businesses open, and we're showing up for another day of work. So here we go. So your questions, and actually no poll today. We have no poll, no time for polling today. We'll double down maybe next week on the poll you like so much. So what's going on with some of these pandemic relief programs? I will tell you what's going on is the employee retention credit is still open. It's open retroactively because it did close as of 9/30/2021. So it is open for those periods of time before then, and you can go back and you can still apply for funds if you actually qualify for the ERC. You can go back and you can Form 941 or use another alternative method of actually getting that funding. And the ERC, even though it is a tax credit from the federal government, it can be used retroactively to actually pay you a sum of money in advance. So it's not used necessarily against future earnings. The city of Bakersfield, their Restart Loan to Grant program and another grant program that they have are both open, and they're working with Access Plus Capital. Access Plus Capital is kind of your point to go to, or you can actually also check with the Kern or Women's Business Center. So the Kern Women's Business Center will also help you with those City of Bakersfield deals. We have the County of Kern Micro Grant Program that's going to open later this month, early February. I'll have a firm date, I hope, for you next week. But that is the program where you can receive up to $2,500 of grant funds where you do not have to pay them back for your business. If you have a very small business, one that generated less than $50,000 in revenue in the year 2019, pull out your tax return, demonstrate that, 2-page application, few other requirements, sure. And then it's pretty much boom. So that hopefully will open in, I'm hoping late January, but maybe early February. So keep looking for that, and we'll have more on that as we get to that launch date coming up. We also have PPP forgiveness that's open. We have about 80%, and we've been running into more individuals that have had a problem and they need to appeal for their PPP forgiveness to actually go through. So we'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks as well. The EIDL loan is closed. It closed on 12/31/21. You still can get an increase if you already have an existing economic injury disaster loan or reconsideration. You can seek reconsideration if you were declined. And that's the same thing with the economic injury disaster loan targeted advance, which is also closed, but they are still doing reconsiderations. Also, the EIDL supplemental advance, which was a $5,000 amount that was given to those who received the targeted advance, is closed. No further processing. It is done. FEMA has a COVID-19 funeral repayment expense. It is open and you can apply by phone for that. Coming up soon, we're going to have the California Dreamer Fund. The California Dreamer Fund opens probably sometime in the next month or so, and that is going to be grants to new businesses. And we're probably looking at later in February for that, but it's going to be a statewide $35 million program, whereas you actually can attain some training, go through a class, and work on some technical assistance with the SBDC or some other providers potentially. And we're hoping it's the SBDC because this is a competitive grant program that we have applied for on the regional level from the 14 counties of Central California. So that hopefully will be happening soon. And also there'll be another small business venture fund that will make some form of investments to not only individuals, but potentially organizations and others in the underserved communities, underserved markets, rural areas, etc. So that is going to be happening maybe spring, maybe March on that one. We will continue to have details for you on how you can work with the SBDC to access these particular programs. So stay tuned in the coming weeks. I did mention the current small business micro grant program. Again, on that is $2,500. You must be in business in the year 2019 and produce a previously filed tax return. Businesses must have less than 5 full-time equivalent employees and revenues less than $50,000. And the CSUB Small Business Development Center is one of 4 local nonprofits that are actually carrying out that particular program, along with CAPK, the Kern Economic Development Foundation, and the Kern Women's Business Center. Okay, so maybe my shortest introduction in 97 weeks of doing this, but we've got a lot to cover today, a lot to go through. And we have 2 special guests, and we're going to start off with Dr. Mark Evans, who joined CSUB in 1978. I've said this before, for those that were around in 1978, I believe 1978 was a very good year. And it actually ended up being a very good year for CSUB as well. He is currently economics professor emeritus. He has held positions as the economic chair, the BPA associate dean, the BPA being the School of Business and Public Administration, or business school at CSUB. He was also the extended university dean or interim dean for about 6 years, has a number of other major accomplishments over these times that I'm not going to read all these. I'm going to cut right down to the end and say recognitions include, he was our Central California Regional SBDC, that's the 14 county network stakeholder champion of the year in 2017. And going back a few years, he was also the El Paso Natural Gas Award for Excellence in Teaching winner in 1997. It's my pleasure, as always, to introduce Dr. Mark Evans. Dr. Evans, thank you for joining us. Cruise on over here to the hot seat, and you are now there.
Okay, Kelly, where's my presentation?
That would be right here, Dr.
All
Evans.
right. Push those buttons, huh?
Just front arrow, back arrow.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. What I'm going to talk about is give you an overview of something you've undoubtedly heard about, the B3K initiative in Kern County. And then we're going to take a look some recent happenings, as well as what the future looks like in terms of the energy sector in Kern County. So basically the outline is we're going to briefly mention what Better Bakersfield Boundless Kern is. We're going to kind of summarize the energy policy environment in California, and then just mention a smattering of recent energy developments, by no means comprehensive, but just to give you a feel of just the breadth of things going on. And then I'm going to end with some reasons that I think we can be optimistic as well as worried about the energy sector in the future. So, Better Bakersfield Boundless Kern. Okay, this is an initiative that describes itself as a public-private collaborative to develop and carry out an investment strategy for inclusive economic growth in Kern County. The core organizations in charge of B3K are CSUB, City of Bakersfield, County of Kern, Kern Economic Development Corporation, and the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. Now, basically what this initiative is it started out with a very impressive situational analysis of the county by Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. And then based on that information, there were work groups formed. Each work group is developing strategies and tactics that will be implemented. And then there's an outcomes dashboard that will really track how we're doing, and that will then lead to some adjustments, continuous improvements where necessary. The strategies and tactics revolve around 5 regional economic drivers. That is the export sector of the region. And by export, I don't just mean out of the country, but out of the county. Sales originating out of the county. Human capital or talent, innovation, infrastructure, and governance. There's an executive steering committee. There are 5 work groups organized around the main strategies for industries: energy, aerospace, advanced manufacturing, and business services. So that component of it that can actually generate sales outside the region. And then there's a general business ecosystem work group titled Entrepreneurship and Business Support. And then there's something called the Deep Prosperity Advisory Committee that basically works with all the groups, and their objective is to ensure that the growth and prosperity initiatives that are undertaken all are inclusive. So the project is, I would call Brookings Institution one of the lead organizations, but they defer from calling themselves that. But I do want to say a word about them. They are the main consultants, the drivers of this initiative. Brookings was founded in 1916, located in Washington, D.C. It describes itself as nonpartisan and with expertise across a diversity of intellectual spectrums. It's sometimes described as a liberal think tank, but one study that put think tanks on a scale of 0 to 100 for conservative to liberal gave them a score of 53. So I think they are somewhere in the middle. They've been quoted as much by conservatives as liberals. So again, I think the title of pretty much center focused applies. They've been found to be the most frequently cited think tank in the United States. One of 5 or 6 of their main programs is called the Brookings Metro program. If you look at their website, they list over 80 experts in the metro urban area. And I would say all of them, or just about all of them, have doctorate degrees. One of their main products is something called Metro Monitor that you may have seen. It tracks inclusive economic growth for the 192 largest metro areas in the US. This covers about 78% of the population, 84% of the nation's GDP. So our focus today is just on the energy component looking forward. And you can see on the left that 2014 was a good year. That said, we're right now in terms of GDP originating in the mining sector, we're down to about 80% of where we were in 2014. In terms of jobs, we're in the high 50%, so we've lost a good 40% of our jobs. The B3K Energy Work Group is headed by Jennifer Haley at Kern Oil and Refining, Trem Smith at Berry Corporation. The vision of this work group is to develop a globally recognized carbon neutral innovation and production supercluster for renewable fuels and carbon capture, building on current energy strengths with potential to generate large numbers of new and durable good jobs. That is a mouthful, but it's a statement worth contemplating. Okay, let's talk about what's driving the energy sector in California. It's primarily, I think, four things. One that we're well aware of here, the regulations aimed at ending oil production by 2045. A second major driver is the renewable portfolio standard for utilities, where 50% of our electricity has to be generated by renewables in 2026, up to 60% in 2030, and then the ambitious goal of 100% in 2045. And I think as we go through some of the things happening in the county, you'll be able to easily draw the line between these four major policies and the individual projects that are occurring. Okay, the low carbon fuel standard applying to refineries and fuel distributors. What this does is it decreases the carbon intensity of gasoline and diesel fuels over time. For example, the 2020 carbon intensity benchmarks are 10% below what the actual average carbon intensities were in 2010. And the way the carbon intensity is brought down in each market is through a mix of products. Major mixes in the gasoline market are ethanol, electricity, hydrogen, and the diesel market, biodiesel, renewables, renewable diesel, natural gas, and biomethane. Now, the way these covered entities achieve their standards or their caps is by non-covered entities producing low carbon substitutes and then selling them to the entities that are covered by the fuel standard, the major refineries and fuel distributors. There is a market, so a covered entity can buy and sell credits from another covered entity to the extent that it over or underachieves the target. And then finally, we have the cap and trade greenhouse gas program. This covers businesses with over 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year. That's about 80% of California's total. That's about somewhere between 450 and 500 businesses. What's covered are these greenhouse gases listed here. And then there's a target. The 2020 target was to achieve 1990 levels. The 2030 target is to come in 40% below 1990 emissions. And then the 2050 goal is a 80% reduction. Now, the way this market works is for every ton of greenhouse gas emissions, the covered entities have to have a 1 ton allowance or a 1 ton offset. And then their emission caps are decreasing over time in accordance with these above mentioned goals. Now, how do you get an allowance if you're a greenhouse gas emitter covered by the cap and trade? And some CARB every year distributes a bunch of these things free. mainly to industrial plants so that they're not at a competitive disadvantage in terms of cost with competitors outside California. And then what happens with the utilities is they have to auction off all the allowances they're given, and that has to go toward decreasing the price we pay for electricity. CARB has an annual auction, and then there's also the tradable market for companies where they can sell their allowances to other companies. An offset is a greenhouse gas emission somewhere by somebody not covered by cap and trade. Okay, so these don't even have to be projects in California. They could be anywhere throughout the United States. And for example, if I increase forestation back east somewhere, I could get a offset approved by CARB, and then somebody that is covered will buy it to cover part of their emissions. There's an auction every year and the proceeds from this auction go into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and this funds all sorts of energy programs. There's a 35% set aside for disadvantaged communities. That's a competitive grant. So here's a smattering of things going on. And I think if you think about it, you can see that they're all driven either by the renewable portfolio standard, the low carbon fuel standard, or cap and trade. Then I also briefly mention what's in the greenhouse or in the infrastructure bill relating to carbon capture and hydrogen. Okay, solar, there's a plant opening in Rosamond. That's going to be 100 megawatts of photovoltaic solar plus 50 megawatt hours of battery. It already has a 15-year contracts to sell its electricity. And again, these are not by any means comprehensive. It's just one thing going on in each area. Solar linked to industrial process. There's a new project recently announced by Rio Tinto where they will use computer-controlled mirrors to generate production and steam. And then that's going to power basically their operations at night when the sun is not shining. Dairy methane capture, a lot of these programs, one of them, California Bioenergy and Chevron, the dairy biogas is captured, processed, and turned into renewable natural gas. It's going to be distributed via a utilities natural gas pipeline. It serves the market for heavy duty trucks and buses. Renewable diesel. We know that the plant on Rosedale Refinery is about to open. It's going to use cooking oils, grease, rendered fats to produce about 15,000 barrels a day of renewable diesel. Again, heavy truck market. They eventually hope to produce something that could be used for jet fuel. Again, renewable diesel, lots of things going on. Hydrogen. One thing going on locally that'll produce green hydrogen. It's going to use Tehachapi wind power to produce the hydrogen fuel, which will then be shipped to regional truck stops via tractor trailer. Eventually, they hope to be able to distribute using natural gas. The engineering work for this project is being done by a Bakersfield company, Anacapa. And then the big elephant in the room, the hydrogen part of the federal infrastructure bill recently passed, 9.5 million to create a clean hydrogen industry. 8 billion is going to go to create hydrogen hubs throughout the country. These are often referred to as clusters, but what it is hydrogen manufacturing, transportation, energy, support services, all co-located in a similar area where they can share the infrastructure, achieve economies of scale, and hopefully develop all sorts of spillover benefits from being close to each other. The good news for the natural gas industry is the way this infrastructure bill is written, the carbon intensity standard will be at a level that'll allow hydrogen to be produced from natural gas or methane with carbon capture. So this means that this is a big deal for the natural gas industry. Carbon capture. Okay, the CRC project out at Elk Hills, they're capturing CO2 from their power plant, burying it. This is one of only 9 projects approved by Department of Energy in 2019. Here, the big deal is there's going to be 4 regional carbon capture sites. They're going to be created. It looks to me, if you look at the criteria, it looks like they were written by Kern County. Looking ahead, I see the glasses being at least half full. Why? Okay, the renewable portfolio and low carbon fuel standards are just getting tighter every year. Okay, there's going to be greater opportunities to create offsets to sell to the companies covered by cap and trade. The in-state requirement is going from 0 to 50%. So half of the offset projects going forward are going to have to take place in the state. Allowance prices are increasing. New Sacramento initiatives. In last year's budget, there was a $600 million set aside called the Community Economic Resilience Fund. This divides the state up into 13 regions. Kern County is its own region. It's the only county in the region. It's to help communities transition to carbon neutrality. So again, I think we're going to get a lion's share of this support. Also in the recent budget is $200 million for abandoned wells, additional money for related training and worker support. Another reason for optimism are these 2 elements of the infrastructure bill, both carbon capture and hydrogen hub. They're major expenditures to develop sectors that are going to be right up our alley. There's talk about property tax backfill. As you probably know, solar is excluded from property taxation at the local level. Additionally, declining oil and gas property tax revenues. There's talk of backfilling the oil tax revenues by Governor Newsom out of one of these bills. And then to me, I think there's still a question of whether the state does or the counties don't have to be reimbursed for the solar exclusion given Proposition 4 in 1979. A couple things happening at CSUB, BC, Kern Valley Ventures, Kern Venture Group. Lots of grants and gifts given to both CSUB and BC to build their energy programs. Kern Venture Group's second round of funding is going to more closely align with the B3K opportunity industries, which includes energy. So in closing, I would say, as we all know, the economy's dramatically changing. I think even by world history standards, what we're going through is a dramatic change. Nowhere is it going to have greater economic impact than in Kern County. We are suffering losses, as we know. However, if you think about what's going on, there's few, if any, regions that are better suited to capitalize on the emerging opportunities. All the stuff going on, you can see that B3K has legs, especially in this energy area. And that Kern County is not burying its head on the sand, but it is moving forward and transforming itself. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And excellent news. And oil prices today. Any idea what oil prices is today?
Tell me.
West Texas crude is trading right now at 86.70 cents per barrel.
Okay.
So, which is the 5th straight week oil prices have increased, and people are making a case for $100 a barrel oil again. So interesting times indeed. Okay, so next we are going to bring in, elevate Dr. Rich Ryan and introduce him. And let's do that. I think he's here under Rich. Rich, you're being promoted to a panelist since you're remote. So you can jump in at any time. I'm going to jump in and introduce you. You are free to share your screen whenever. Could impact the quality of your introduction, I might add. So Rich is an applied economist, conducts research on a variety of topics, including wage, cyclicality, unemployment, labor market polarization, job loss associated with increased automation and international trade. Boy, that's a mouthful. And of course, renewable resources. As an assistant professor of economics at California State University Bakersfield, Rich teaches macroeconomics, which, if I remember back in the day, was my favorite economics classes at the time. Before coming to CSUB, Rich earned his PhD in economics from the University of Michigan. I'm sure he's frequented the Big House on numerous occasions and might even have a Harbaugh story or two to tell, but probably not. Rich, are you there? Take it away if you are.
Yes, thanks. Okay, let me, I forgot my webcam, I haven't taught in a while, so now everything is disjointed, so I'm getting ready, but okay. Thanks for having me. Okay, so here we are. So today what I'd like to do is talk about reallocation, then kind of the sentiment of things, and then where the economy is headed, and then summarize very quickly here. So reallocation. Here is the change in employment each month in the US economy. And maybe what stands out is that the US economy lost over 20 million jobs in a single month. And so this gives you a sense that there's a tremendous potential for reallocation in the economy. And what do I mean by reallocation? I mean transitioning from, say, a retail store, like brick and mortar store, to sort of online retail. All right, so this is the US, and just to give you a sense of things, here are things in Kern County. Okay, and first thing that maybe strikes you is that there's a tremendous amount of cyclicality here in Kern County in terms of employment. And then another dramatic fact here is that we lost between March and April close to 40,000 jobs in a single month. So again, what the economy is doing is that it's got to take those people, get them into new jobs. And we know that small businesses are kind of on the vanguard of this. And this is kind of the idea that I want to talk back today. And just to give you a sense of how rapidly this is happening, we experienced, I think, on this is not seasonally adjusted here. The unemployment rate was above 15% in Kern County, and now it's down by 7.4. And it was the United States economy was almost 15, and now it's down to 3.9. So this reallocation process is happening very, very fast. And so then the question is kind of like, okay, where are we going here? This is kind of the question I want to ask. So small businesses are a very important part of this. Why? Well, small businesses exhibit this dynamism. So we know that small businesses create the most jobs, and we also know that small businesses destroy the most jobs, and they exhibit this up or out dynamics. So the idea is like only the most productive small businesses continue on. Okay, so it's either you're either destroying jobs or you're making them, and then we know that the ones who stay are the most productive firms. This is kind of like the primary way that aggregate productivity changes. So existing firms aren't changing their things too much. And so the most significant effect on aggregate productivity is kind of like these new entrepreneurs, these small businesses. And that's kind of where I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the talk today. I'm going to be a little heroic here on business formation and attributing it a lot to small businesses, but there's a lot of evidence for that. Okay, so that's kind of like background, a lot of potential for reallocation. And then the question is where we're going. But first, where we're going, what I would like to do maybe first is talk about kind of the sentiment around the economy right now. So this comes from the Small Business Pulse Survey conducted by the Census Bureau. And they call up a bunch of businesses and they ask them how you think things are going, or they ask them a series of questions. Here are respondents in California. And you can see the businesses that respond here are saying like, okay, did COVID have a large negative effect? Yeah, like here it was. And this is, you know, nicely coming down here, thankfully here. The COVID effect here is kind of like this, and it's kind of being replaced by little or no effect here. Moderate negative effect has kind of been stubbornly high, but you can see kind of the large negative is being replaced by the little or no. So that's some evidence for optimism here going forward. Okay, so if you dig down into the documentation for this, what the census does is classify or put a numeric value to each of the responses, and -1 is large negative, large positive effect is +1 here. So this is the, you know, +1 are the stockholders of Zoom Inc. Okay, so they're like, this is fantastic, and then -1s are all the, you know, local bars and restaurants or something. Okay, and then they average these up, and you can kind of get a sense of things here over these weekly surveys, and you can see the kind of things are improving. Okay, so again, -1 is really bad, and things are kind of improving, and then California is like a little bit less than the United States. Okay, so this is kind of the backdrop of where we are. Okay, and now I want to talk about where things are going, or at least some suggestive evidence of where things are going. Okay, so where's the economy headed? Well, we're going to answer this question today by looking at flows into business formation. Now, unfortunately, the census doesn't publish all this cool data that I'm going to share with you by firm size. Nevertheless, that we know that small business are kind of the largest component of business formation here. Okay, so I wish I had cooler data, but you know, it is what it is. All right. Okay, a few things I want to share with everybody today, or some suggestive evidence for this is that California is doing better than the US. There is lots of reallocation. The ag and oil sectors aren't exhibiting much reallocation. And by the way, when I say that, I just mean around COVID. I don't mean around these longer run trends that Mark was talking about earlier. All that is still going on in the background. This kind of just is coming out of this COVID reallocation. And yeah, I'm going to provide some suggestive evidence that this really is COVID reallocation here, because the largest sectors of job creation are non-store retailers. This is online, administrative and support service, personal and laundry services. Okay, so it's a good time to be in the laundry business. And then truck transportation. Okay, so all of those things are like really things that we know are like very COVID related here. Okay, and so why do we have to look at formation? Well, if you think about kind of like the sectoral composition of the United States, this is kind of like this is the stock. The sectoral composition is kind of like this big stock. The unemployment rate didn't go to 100%, right? In the peak crisis, we had like 14.5 in the United States. All the water in the bathtub isn't moving around that much, and so the way to infer like where the composition change, the warmth of the bathtub, if you will, is to kind of like look at the water coming in. Forgive me, this is a silly graph, but I'm teaching intermediate macro, and so this is this is the quintessential intermediate macro. What this figure is missing is kind of the outflow. So another thing we don't have good evidence on is job destruction. So the Census Bureau gives us kind of these snapshots. They don't give us linked data, so it's hard to infer what businesses are being destroyed. other than looking at the aggregate composition, and that aggregate composition is hard to move around. So the easiest way to infer it is look at the flow, and that's what we're going to kind of look at today. We're going to look at the flow of new jobs, and we know that small businesses are a really important component of that. And by the way, the census defines small businesses as any business with 500 employees or fewer. Okay, so here are the data. They come from the IRS. Each business is given this employer identification number, this EIN number. So any employer business, it's required. So if you're going to hire somebody, you need this for tax purposes, and even non-employer, like a like a sole proprietorship or something, might often do this. For example, if you need to get a bank account. Okay, and then I want to just differentiate real quickly these high propensity business applications. So the business applications are going to be all these new applications of people applying for these EIN numbers, which we have good data of. And then these high propensity ones, they're kind of, there's 5 categories, 4, I guess, here. And these classifications are updated frequently by census. Okay, so these are just the most likely. And this group is like, within 8 quarters, there's like a 50% chance that these people will actually start a business. And then the non-high propensity business applications are everybody else, and there's only a 3.8% there. So what I'm going to talk about here is kind of like potential, but I can tell you that there's good evidence that the time series variation in these things of the actual creation versus just filing for one of these EIN numbers is very close. So the time series variation will be informative, and where the economy is headed also informative. Okay. All right. So here we go. Here's in the US. All right. Here are all the new business applications. All right. And then here are the high propensity business applications. Again, these are just firms reporting data to the IRS and saying, I want an EIN number. So we have good data tracking on this. They actually publish this at a weekly level. These are aggregated for the month. Okay. And what you can see is there's like a lot of new business. All right. The pandemic certainly changed this a lot here. And then but the high propensity ones are kind of flat. Now, if you look at California, things look a little bit better. So first, I'm just going to point out here, you can kind of see this dip in the Great Recession. Now, why was that? Well, it turns out that a lot of this dynamism is funded by like people starting businesses like out of their garage or out of their basement or something, and they use it as the source of funds, home equity. And so it's not surprising that California took a hit here in terms of business applications, probably because the California housing crisis was higher than US nation as a whole. Okay, so that's point number 1. But that's a good thing, because in the Great Recession, in the coronavirus pandemic year, housing prices have probably been fantastic in California. Okay, so that's like really good. And this is some optimism there's probably a lot of dynamism here in California, which is generally a good thing. Now, just to give you kind of an idea here of California versus the US, you can see that these high propensity, I've just indexed the series here because of the level difference, I've just indexed them. And you can kind of see in terms of percent that the California kind of outstrips the US as a whole over the post-Great Recession period here, which is pretty interesting. All right, so California doing a pretty good job of getting these high propensity business startups here, so that's really cool. Okay, so now here, where's the reallocation going? All right, so then I just take these business applications and then I disaggregated them by industry, major sectoral sectors of the US economy. So there's a bunch of them. All right, these are all these green lines, and then I'm just going to highlight a few here. And you can see that accommodation and food is like number 1. Here's construction. I can't even believe this, that the new business for construction is still lower than it was like pre-Great Recession, even though every day is like a housing crisis in California, still probably like there's not enough construction going on. Okay, so that's super interesting. Okay, and then you can see like truck and warehousing is made kind of like this significant like post-pandemic thing. These are kind of the places where you think reallocation is going to go. All right, health is this green one. Okay, so it's super interesting. Okay, this just zooms in here. So again, we just kind of saying like, okay, here's where things are happening: accommodation and food services, construction, health. Okay, maybe not too surprising. All right, but still, you're kind of maybe thinking to yourself, wait a minute, food services, but I thought all the businesses were closing. Okay. Okay, so then what we're going to do now is just kind of disaggregate these series one more. Okay, so take those broad industrial classifications and then break them down just into a little bit finer bins. Normally, the Census Bureau does not publish those data for us, except that they did this special 40-week classification here. So far we've looked kind of at those two-digit broad industrial classifications. Now we want to disaggregate further into 3 digits. Okay, now you guys know how interesting my life is going through there with the 2 digits and then the 3 digits. Okay, so there you go. So that's super interesting here. Okay, the only way we're allowed to do this is because there was this special survey conducted by Census, and then they give us this 40 weeks in 2019 and 40 weeks in 2020, and they give us this special 3-digit things here. Okay, so this is super interesting because why? It allows us to go in there and look at business formation in agricultural sector. And you can see that this is support for agricultural and mining. But okay, so supports here, crop production, I mean, maybe some, but not much. And then animal production, yeah, like basically there's no job creation here. Maybe not surprising, okay? Again, I'm sure that there's a lot of these long-run trends here, but COVID-related reallocation doesn't seem to be affecting ag sector that much. Maybe that could be good or bad for Kern. It is what it is. And then oil, again, oil and gas extraction, again, these are lumped under mining. Okay, so again, the 3-digit, in the 2 digits, they're lumped under mining, and then in the 3 digits, we can disaggregate them into oil and gas extraction. Okay, and you can see like not much is happening. Again, these are weekly data here, and you can kind of see that, you know, whatever, there's like 30, and by the way, the jaggedness is the rounding because the Census Bureau rounds things because they don't want you to find out like who's applying for businesses. Okay, so that's why it looks a little jagged here. But you can see that there's like 30 applications or something a week or something like this. Okay, but not too jumping with the COVID. Okay, so again, these are probably on more like Mark's long-term climate change things, not a lot of reallocation around the COVID economy. All right, so that's interesting. And then finally here, what I did in this graph here is kind of add up all the 3-digit sectors with positive change. So all the sectors that had more business applications in 2020 than they did in 2019. So it just said, okay, look, this 3-digit industry, did you have more business applications in 2020 than you did in 2019? That's good evidence that the economy is reallocating into this industrial sector. All right. And then I listed them. Here are the top ones. And this is kind of the most striking maybe graph here is that of all the total, business applications in the year 2020, that 40, again, this is that 40-week window, the first 40 weeks in 2020, 40% of the new business applications were done by non-store retailers. Okay, so again, this is very strong evidence that the economy is kind of reallocating away from physical brick and mortar store into non-store retailers. All right, I'm sure small business are leading the charge here. And then administrative and support services, again, comes up second. Okay, there were 220, almost 250,000 applications here. They made up almost 20%. And then cumulative 60% of this, in this 40-week window, 60% of new business applications were done by non-store retailers and administrative and support services. Then we've got the old business and laundry services. Okay, so this is good news. So really big growth sector here in business and laundry. Again, they had almost 15% of all these new positive business applications were done by personal water services. And then cumulatively, these three-digit industry sectors made up about 3/4 of all the business applications. Truck and transportation, maybe not surprising, the supply chain, the supply chain thing here. Okay, the truck and transportation. Okay, again, we're reallocating labor from, I guess, universities or something, like we're still online. Okay, and we're reallocating this labor into truck and transportation, and then repair and maintenance. What's striking about this is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these top 5 industries represent about 92% of new business applications are in these 5 business, 3-digit industrial sectors alone. Okay, so this is like where the economy is redirecting its resources. Very informative. Okay, so summary here. What did we learn today? Well, we learned that 1, the economy is reallocating. Remember, close to 40,000 people in Kern County alone lost their job within 1 month. That means that there's a tremendous amount of reallocation, like where is the economy going to direct those labor services? Where are they going to go? Okay, and then we asked this question, like, where is this reallocation taking place? Well, not surprisingly, non-store retailers is huge. It makes up, what was it? I guess about almost 40% of new business applications were filed in the first 20 weeks of 2020 of these non-store retailers. Then we have administrative support services. And then finally, it looks like the oil and ag sectors experience less of this reallocation. Again, this is COVID reallocation. It's not this long-term reallocation that Mark was talking about. And then there we go. And then finally, the slide you've all been waiting for, the end.
Well, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And one of the things I have a couple questions. We have one from our audience. And are any of those numbers broken down by gender?
I believe that there were some gender. Yes, I think the pulse survey, I think, does have asked people by several questions. If you go to that link there, you can see, but probably for the EIN numbers, they don't ask you any demographics, I would guess, but I'm not sure about that.
Is there a place where somebody can go and find that information?
Yes, yeah, so here's, for example, there's like the pulse survey, which is, you can play around with the pulse survey. The other data sets are like a little bit harder to grab, but I grab them. There is no data on gender in there. I know that. So.
Okay, great. Let's see, here's a couple questions that I came up with. Fascinating stuff, absolutely fascinating. So I would say, obviously, COVID shock is a reality, and that reallocation and COVID fatigue, whatever we want to call it. How much of that is going to stick, in your opinion, and how much of it is going to hopefully go away when COVID hopefully goes away?
Is this question for me or?
That's for you.
Mark?
You're in the,
yeah.
You're in the hot seat. He's over here. It's cool. Right now.
Yeah, so that's the question. So when I was looking at these numbers today, I was surprised by the amount of reallocation in those 5 in those detailed industrial classifications. So that was actually surprising to me. I didn't think that the reallocation was that significant, but it certainly does feel like, yeah, there's something there that's is going to change, like non-store retail and things like that.
Yeah, wow, 93% in 5 categories.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing that I didn't see in there that surprised me was, and maybe it's coming later, and maybe it's more of a more recent phenomenon as we got closer to 2022, and maybe it's just not showing up as far as new businesses, but it's the new and used auto sales and used auto sales and the prices and everything. So I was a little surprised, but then again, a lot of those are private party, not business, not small business, and some of the dealerships will be larger businesses, some of them. So maybe that's why, but I just kind of found that interesting.
Yeah, and just to be real clear, like these are like business applications, so it would have to be car dealerships kind of like coming online, and maybe that's like it's just not showing up there as new, whereas that's kind of like the existing stock of businesses and things like that. So I'm sure that's like a really important component of what's happening.
Well, that was great. I was really busy doing screenshots of most of those charts. I think I missed one. I might be in touch with you on that.
Yeah.
It's really great information to go back to. Thank you so much. And that's going to wrap us up for this week. So for Rich Ryan, Mark Evans, just a simple doctor, a couple doctors here with nobody. We'll be back next week for number 98. We will be sending this out this week with all the resources and a copy of the presentation. So you will get that if you signed up for the webinar. As a courtesy, we've been doing that. So we will do that for those of you. I just saw a quick little note in the chat, so that'll be there. And we'll be back next week. Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Thank you, Dr. Evans. We'll see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.